Gazans who don't have enough food, it's because Hamas is stealing it. Israel will not allow you to shove a terror state down our throats.
Gaza is being starved again, but now the hunger feels endless, merciless. In 2025, a famine officially grips the Strip. Mothers skipping meals so their children might live. Infants wasting away in darkened hospitals with no power, no medicine, no clean water. Food convoys are turned back, eateries empty, and airstrikes have shredded the little that remains of supply chains. Yet this nightmare is not new. It is the culmination of decades of closures and temporary restrictions turned into a permanent chokehold. And for nearly 2 decades, courageous flotillas have tried to pierce the blockade. From the first Free Gaza boats in 2008 to the massive 2025 Global Sumud Flotilla. So how did Gaza go from becoming the world's largest open-air prison to becoming a place facing total siege, famine, and near-complete isolation? And Netanyahu determined that this suffering will not end until Palestine itself is erased. Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. To understand today's catastrophe, we have to rewind. Since Britain's mandate and the Balfour Declaration, every solution has widened the fault lines between Israelis and Palestinians. The 1948 Nakba displaced 700,000 Palestinians. The 1967 war added Gaza to the map of occupation. Oslo promised relief but instead institutionalized closures. By the early 1990s, Israel had already imposed hundreds of days of shutdowns, strangling Gaza's economy. Each round of security measures created deeper dependency, higher unemployment, and tighter control. Is it any wonder that by 2025, after Hamas's rise and Netanyahu's vows to block Palestinian statehood, Gaza is literally starving under total siege? Gaza's current famine is not a sudden disaster but the end point of decades of calculated restriction. In the early 1990s, Israel cancelled general exit permits, dismantled free movement, and introduced closures that became a way of life. Goods, workers, and students were trapped behind a barrier built in 1994. GDP crashed. Families who once relied on Israeli markets were cut off overnight. Each time violence flared, the restrictions hardened. What began as temporary security measures became an economic and social chokehold, proof that starvation by bureaucracy can be as devastating as starvation by bombs.
Suppose Palestinians say, well, we're under terrorist attack for 35 years, therefore we have a right to carry out suicide bombings.
Which is what they say.
Do you accept this? Does anybody accept it? All right, then how come everyone accepts the Israeli claim to be doing it, which is a much weaker claim? Because after all, there's no symmetry in this situation. They are the military occupiers. Palestine isn't occupying Israel. And this isn't just started now. It's gone on years ago. I mean, 5 years. There has been a harsh, brutal, miserable military occupation. There has not been a political settlement. The reason why there has not been a political settlement is that the United States unilaterally has blocked it for 25 years.
By the mid-2000s, Israel claimed it had disengaged from Gaza, but the disengagement was a mirage. Yes, settlers left in 2005, but Israel kept control of the borders, the airspace, and the sea. When Hamas won elections in 2006 and seized Gaza in 2007, Israel declared the Strip a hostile entity and imposed an indefinite blockade. People of Gaza were punished for electing their own government. Imports were slashed, dual-use goods, including concrete for rebuilding, were banned, and Gaza's smuggling tunnels became lifelines. Israel's message was clear: as long as Hamas rules, Gaza will be sealed. But who pays the price when fuel, medicine, and food are throttled? From 2007 to 2014, the siege tightened like a noose. All crossings were heavily restricted, except for drips of humanitarian supplies. Unemployment topped 50%. Power outages lasted 8 hours or more each day. Access to healthcare and education outside Gaza shrank to almost nothing. Each Israeli offensive, 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, killed thousands of civilians and left rubble where homes, factories, and water networks once stood. The UN warned that Gaza could become uninhabitable, but the blockade did not ease. It calcified.
I mean, Hamas are not my friends. I don't like what they do. But they've been doing not much. What they've been doing is what I described. I didn't have time to go through the pattern, but I'll repeat it. You can find it. Starting in November 2005, an agreement was reached between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, then, not Hamas. Israel completely rejected it, and Hamas lived up to it, not a single rocket. Then came the January election, and Israel intensified its attack with U.S. support. After that, there are repeated attacks, Israeli attacks, and ceasefires agreements. Every ceasefire agreement is approximately like what I read. What happens is Israel completely dismisses and disregards it, maintains the siege in violation of the ceasefire, increases the violence. Hamas lives up to it, and Israel officially accepts that agrees to that, until some escalation of Israeli violence leads to a Hamas reaction, and then another episode of mowing the lawn. That's been going on since November 2005. Hamas is not a nice organization. They do a lot of rotten things. That's for the Palestinians to worry about.
Even when international outrage forced partial openings after 2014, the core restrictions never went away. Reconstruction crawled, concrete and steel were still blocked as dual use. By 2018-2019, tens of thousands of Gazans marched into the Great March of Return, demanding an end to the siege. Hundreds were killed by Israeli fire. Nothing changed. When war erupted again in May 2021, Israel bombed Gaza for 11 days and then reinstated the same blockade. It was déjà vu, each cycle leaving Gaza weaker, hungrier, and more desperate, while Israel doubled down on security control west of the Jordan River. Because land routes were locked, activists turned to the sea. In 2008, the Free Gaza movement sent 2 small boats, Liberty and Free Gaza, carrying 44 activists and medical supplies. For the first time in decades, they reached Gaza. These were not warships, they were lifeboats for a besieged people. Yet even this modest success exposed how far Israel would go to prevent independent aid. The showdown came in May 2010 with the Gaza Freedom Flotilla, 6 ships, 700 activists from 40 countries, and tons of construction materials sailed towards Gaza. Israeli commandos boarded in international waters. On the Mavi Marmara, 9 activists were killed. The raid sparked global outrage and shredded Israel-Turkey relations. Under pressure, Israel eased some import rules but kept the naval blockade intact. Netanyahu's government had demonstrated that breaking Gaza's isolation by sea would be met with lethal force. After 2010, flotillas kept coming. Freedom Flotilla 2 in 2011, Freedom Flotilla 3 in 2015, the Women's Boat to Gaza 2016, the Just Future for Palestine Flotilla in 2018. Each was intercepted, boarded or seized by the Israeli Navy. Activists were deported or jailed. None delivered large-scale relief, but they succeeded in one thing: exposing to the world that Gaza's starvation is enforced not only by walls and checkpoints, but also by gunboats on the Mediterranean.
When Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, was under Israeli control, 80% of its residents were Christians. But since the PA took control, that number has dwindled to under 20%. These are the people you want to give a state to? What you're doing is giving the ultimate reward to intolerant fanatics who perpetrated and supported the October 7th massacre. Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it. So here's another message to those Western leaders. Israel will not allow you to shove a terror state down our throats.
Even back then, Netanyahu was at the helm of affairs, and he was explicit. He insisted Israel must maintain full security control over Gaza and West Bank even after Hamas is eliminated. In January 2024, he reaffirmed that Gaza cannot be a legitimate Palestinian entity.
יש לי מסר ברור לאותם מנהיגים שמכירים במדינה פלסטינית לאחר הטבח הנורא ב7 באוקטובר. אתם מעניקים פרס עצום לטרור. ויש לי מסר נוסף עבורכם. זה לא יהיה. לא תקום מדינה פלסטינית ממערב לירדן. במשך שנים אני מנעתי את הקמתה של מדינת טרור זו מול לחצים אדירים, גם מבית וגם מן החוץ. עשינו זאת בנחישות ועשינו זאת בתבונה מדינית. לא כל שכן. הכפלנו את ההתיישבות היהודית ביהודה ושומרון ונמשיך בדרך זו. המענה לניסיון האחרון לכפות עלינו מדינת טרור בלב ארצנו, המענה הזה יינתן לאחר שובי מארצות הברית. תמתינו.
This is not a hidden agenda. It is the agenda. Blockade, bombardment, and famine become tools to make Palestinian sovereignty impossible, what critics call erasure by siege. How can Gaza recover or negotiate statehood while cut off from food, medicine, and reconstruction materials? By 2025, this doctrine reaches its deadly peak. After Hamas's October 2023 attack killed over 1,200 Israelis and took hostages, Israel imposed a total blockade. No food, no water, no fuel, no medicine. Partial easing followed but was erratic and insufficient. Aid convoys were blocked or diverted. Over half of humanitarian shipments to northern Gaza were turned away in early 2024. Airstrikes destroyed civilian facilities and food supply chains. International pleas from over 100 aid organizations and multiple European governments failed to change the policy. Netanyahu's government stays the course, insisting siege is necessary until Hamas is dismantled. The result is a catastrophe without precedent. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification declares Gaza in IPC Phase 5, famine. Over 1 million people are in emergency conditions, nearly 400,000 in crisis. An estimated 132,000 children under 5 will suffer acute malnutrition by mid-2026, including 41,000 severe cases at high risk of death. More than 55,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women need urgent nutrition support. 40% of households report going days without food. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Health and sanitation systems have collapsed. This is no longer a metaphorical starvation, but a documented famine, man-made and escalating.
In the year of 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, but Gaza remained the biggest cage in the world, the biggest prison in the world, because Israel put a siege over Gaza by air, by water, and by territory. All the entrance and the exits were controlled by Israel, and most of the time blocked for most of the people of Gaza. They couldn't get out, they couldn't get in. And from time to time, there were some explosions coming out of Gaza, sending rockets toward Israel, which always brought a very brutal reaction of Israel. Operations every 2-3 years, which created a lot of damage and casualties in the Gaza Strip. And it started a war over Gaza, which is mainly a brutal, barbaric attack over Gaza which until now killed at least 53,000 people, 16 or 17,000 children, and the worst of all, almost 1,000 babies, which were not yet 1 year old. This war is not ending, didn't end until now. Israel continues to bomb Gaza, to move the population there as if they were a bunch of sheep. And the catastrophe in Gaza is maybe the biggest catastrophe right now in the current century.
Every statistic underscores one fact: things are worse than ever. Previous blockades choked Gaza's economy. This one chokes life itself. Where earlier rounds allowed limited humanitarian imports, today even baby formula and medical supplies are hostage to security lists. Where earlier wars leveled homes, today entire food networks are bombed. Netanyahu's refusal to countenance a Palestinian state translates into a policy that makes Gaza unlivable. Starvation is no longer a side effect, it is the siege's main effect. Israel frames the blockade as self-defense, preventing weapons, explosives, and dual-use materials from reaching Hamas. It cites the San Remo manual and laws of armed conflict. But critics argue that Gaza's unique status, indefinite siege, and civilian suffering violate international law's ban on collective punishment. The 2010 Flotilla raid and repeated interceptions dramatize this tension. Israel claims legality, but the humanitarian impact tells another story. If the blockade's purpose is security, why are malnourished children and pregnant women the ones paying the price? Attempts to challenge that logic took to the sea. In 2024, the Freedom Flotilla coalition launched Break the Siege, sending 3 ships, Anadolu, Conscience, and Akdeniz, carrying 5,500 tons of food, medicine, and construction materials from Turkey. Diplomatic pressure, Egyptian restrictions, and Israeli intervention meant only Anadolu reached an Egyptian port, still barred from Gaza. In June 2025, Madeleine, carrying baby formula, flour, diapers, and prosthetics, was seized in international waters. Its high-profile crew, including Greta Thunberg and French member of European Parliament Rima Hassan, was detained. Then came the Global Sumud Flotilla in August-September 2025. Over 50 vessels with thousands of activists, parliamentarians, medics, clergy, and veterans from 44 countries sailing from Spain, Italy, Greece, Tunisia, and more. It faced drone attacks near Greece and Tunisia, prompting Spain and Italy to send naval escorts and emergency aid, the first EU protection for a Gaza-bound mission. Israel vowed no boat would reach Gaza, insisting all aid be offloaded on Israeli or Egyptian soil. Organizers rejected that as undermining the mission's symbolism. That confrontation at sea mirrors the one on land. Even some of Israel's closest allies are questioning the logic of a siege that starves civilians while blocking relief. The UN has warned repeatedly that Gaza would become uninhabitable. Now famine proves the warning correct. Aid agencies call for immediate ceasefire and unhindered access. Yet Netanyahu's stance remains fixed. His government blocks, delays, or conditions aid while bombing infrastructure needed for relief. If security is truly the goal, how does starving 2.3 million people make Israel safer? Or is starvation being used as a weapon to break Palestinian resistance and erase the idea of Palestine itself? The pattern is unmistakable. 1990s closures, 2007 blockade, 2010 flotilla raid, 2014 war, 2018 protests, 2021 escalation. Each cycle squeezes Gaza harder. Each temporary measure becomes permanent. Netanyahu's tenure turns this pattern into doctrine. The longer Gaza is isolated, the easier it is to argue it can never be a viable state. The more devastated its infrastructure, the easier to portray it as ungovernable. Starvation then becomes not an accident, but a political instrument. This is why today feels different, not because Gaza has never been starved before, it has, but because the siege has reached totality. Food, water, medicine, electricity, and fuel are cut off simultaneously. 8 flotillas are long neutralized. International outrage is shrugged off. Gaza's 2025 famine is the logical endpoint of decades of blockade plus Netanyahu's open rejection of Palestinian statehood. The question now is not whether Gaza can survive this round, but whether anything called Palestine can survive at all. Gaza is in crisis. Flotillas stopped, blockades layered over blockades. This is the story of a people squeezed to the brink. The famine of 2025 is not a freak event, but the predictable consequence of a policy perfected over 30 years. Netanyahu shows no sign of reversing course. His vision of security control leaves no room for a Palestinian state and no oxygen for Gaza's survival. Every day, the siege continues. More children starve, more hospitals collapse, more aid is blocked. The world once asked whether Gaza was an open-air prison. Now, it must ask a darker question. Is starvation being used to make Palestine disappear? Thank you for watching Statecraft.